Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Looking to buy a dental practice? Whether you're an associate looking to go out on your own or an established owner doctor looking for a second or third location at some point in the future, this episode is for you. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, and I covered this thoroughly in episode 141, I think it was called The State of the Dental Industry, there's a demographic shift occurring in the dental industry. Specifically, close to 35% of the practicing dentists in the United States are 55 and over. And, as I've mentioned before, I'm not practicing ageism, or I'd be doing it against myself too. But the point being is, obviously, if someone's 55 years of age, they're not planning on working for another 40 years. That just usually isn't in the cards. That's not what they're planning on. So in effect, what you're going to have is you're going to have a large supply, considering that most of the owners of dental practices, over 41% of the practices are owned by doctors 55 and over in the United States. You're going to have a large supply of practices hitting the market over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, you combine this with the fact that younger dentists are not buying practices. I talked a little bit about this in last week's episode, and I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think practice ownership for dentists under 30 went from 25% back in 2005 to under 10% in 2021. So you have younger dentists not buying practices, and you're going to have a lot of doctors retiring over the next 5 to 10 years. You have this large supply of practices hitting the market. As I mentioned, we're estimating over 20,000 offices. Now, the average DSO is not looking at picking up all of these practices. The DSOs have a very specific target when they're buying an office, and a lot of these practices aren't going to fall into a DSO's criteria. They're not productive enough. You're not doing 1 or 2 million a year, whatever they're doing, 3, 4, 500,000. So what this means is there's going to be this large supply of dental practices hitting the market. If you're a practicing dentist and you want to add locations, or you're a dentist who's looking to go out on your own, there's really never been a better time to buy an office. I guess that's sort of the point. And to that end, next month we'll be doing a seminar for our clients who are looking at acquiring multiple practices. We called it the DDSO Summit. Yes, doctor-owned DSO. And obviously it would be centered around quality care, quality patient care, and private dentistry. That's usually the direction our clients go. And it's set up to teach all of these clients how to properly acquire practices, get them going, buy them, close on them, get them productive, and then manage multiple offices. And that's a 20-plus hour seminar. We actually have a book we're creating for it, which is right now at 400 pages. So the seminar attendees will have this 400-page book that they can either use to weigh down paper in a 50-mile-an-hour wind, or use as a bludgeoning weapon if they're being attacked, or they can use what's inside. Anyway, but the point being, there's a lot of data on this. But I was going through it as I was putting it together, and I thought, some of this stuff would actually make a great podcast, especially if you're currently looking for an office. Especially in the beginning, how do you find those practices that really fit the criteria that you want? And what is the criteria that you're looking for? So what I'm planning on covering in this week's episode is when you're practice shopping, how to work with a broker to actually get the practices that you're going to be interested in, and how to determine what that practice is. In next week's episode, it's not a direct sequel, it's sort of a continuation. I'm going to talk about what information the broker should be sending you and how to evaluate that information quickly to determine, yes, this is a practice I might be interested in, or no, let me just move on, send me other practices. So with that, my name is Jeff Bloomberg and I'm your host, and I'll start off with my normal disclaimer. I am not a practice broker. I'm not an attorney. So anything I'm telling you doesn't constitute legal advice or replace proper professional advice. In the event that you need it, I rely on you to get that from the appropriate legal or other advisor as you need it. All right. So if you're in the market for a practice, where do you start? Let's say you're thinking, again, you're that doctor who wants to go out on their own, or you're thinking a second location would be good. Well, a couple things. If you're looking to go out on your own, that's one thing. If you're looking for a second or third location, the first thing I would tell you, and this is something we go over very heavily with our clients in great detail, is you have to make sure that your current location isn't a mess, because you don't want to go from a mess to creating a second mess. You're essentially going to want to transfer the culture of Office 1 to Office 2. So there's a number of points you'd want to make sure are in before you did that. I can't get into them necessarily in a full podcast episode, But I would tell you that if you have questions about this, you can always email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. But that said, so let's say you're looking for this office. Where do you start? So maybe someone told you about a practice that's for sale, or you know somebody who's selling, in which case, great. You can just pursue that transaction. You both have attorneys and you get it done. You probably don't even need to use a broker if the thing wasn't listed. But let's say you don't know what practices to look for. Well, now you're going to need a broker. And the first thing I would tell you about practice brokers, they're not all created equally, but beside that, the way practice brokers work is a lot different than how you might think. In many cases, when we're buying something, like for instance, if you're buying a house, if you want to buy a house, the house that you're looking for, unless it hasn't been officially put on the market yet, is in the MLS, which is, I think what does that stand for? Multiple Listing Service, I believe. And the MLS has every house in an area listed with all the specifics and data. And the MLS, I believe, pushes all that information out to websites like Zillow or Trulia or Realtor.com and so on. So you're not going to miss an opportunity unless it actually hasn't been listed yet. Practice brokers don't work like that. A practice broker can only show you, like the only practices they'll be 100% aware of are the ones that they themselves are selling. There is no MLS for dental practices. So why that is, I don't really know. I can assume a few things. At one point, I thought it would be a great business idea, just as a little side business. So if I don't have the bandwidth for it, if you're interested, go for it. But there could be a couple reasons. Obviously, if I'm listing a house and I'm selling my house, there's a sign out front saying for sale. If I'm listing a practice, I may not have told my staff yet. I definitely haven't told my patients. So I can't put a big for sale sign out at the front or a sign up on the front desk saying, hey, this practice is for sale, want to buy it. So usually there's a degree of confidentiality required, and the amount of information I'd have to put up could potentially be identifying information, and my staff could find out or my patients could find out. So there's a degree of anonymity people want during a practice sale. So that might be why there's no MLS. I don't know for dental practices. But in any event, the way brokers work, they generally only have the practices that they are listing. They may be aware of other ones, but the only ones they are 100% aware of are the ones that they have. So essentially, when you're looking for that broker to start this process, you're going to need more than one. You're going to need several, most likely. As a matter of fact, you'll see as I go through my recommendations, you're going to want probably every broker in your area. Okay? Because dental brokers, again, only represent the practices they have under contract. So if you don't proactively seek out multiple brokers, you could theoretically miss out on the ideal practice, even one located right next door. Okay? So if you're going to navigate this process, the key is to identify and establish communication with all of the brokers operating in your desired location. And there are some centralized websites, I will tell you that, things like provide.com or For Sale by Dentist, which do list some available practices. The problems with these sites, and I'm not saying this is always the case, I'm not talking negatively about these sites, but the practices that might be on there could be outdated, they could have already been sold, or the data could be incomplete, and practices that just hit the market may not appear on these platforms right away. So it doesn't give you a real accurate picture of what's for sale in your area. So the most reliable way to go about doing this is to literally contact every broker in your area. Now, there's a number of companies that specialize in selling dental practices, including large companies like Shine or Doctor's Choice. Now, a lot of those, though, operate regionally, in which case they have designated brokers assigned to specific geographic areas, and they don't overlap within the same firm, so every area will have a dedicated rep. All right, so let's say this is you want to buy a practice, where do you start? First thing you do, and look, there's going to be some work involved here if you really want to get down and dirty and find out what's available in your area. First step is you compile a list of every broker in your target area. And this is a simple Google search. So that's sitting down with Google and typing in dental practices for sale in your specified location, and then boom, up come the listings, and then you click on each site and you look at what's for sale. Again, part of the problem with what's listed on their site, that may not be all the practices that are for sale. So don't discount it altogether. There may be things that they have to sell that you don't even aren't aware of yet because they haven't made it to the website yet. But you go through each one. You can either fill out the contact form in order to establish contact with them, or you can get their name and number. ideally start making a list. You can use a spreadsheet or a Google Sheet or something like this, right? And you just start compiling the list of brokers, sending them emails or contact emails or calling them to set up some type of an intro, okay? Now, the only thing I will tell you in certain cases is you may go to a site, and let's say it's something like a bigger company and they represent several regions. You enter the area you're looking for practice in, it'll pop up who that rep is, so it'll tell you who to contact. That's the only other little caveat I'd give you there, unless it's a local company, in which case you sometimes have those. Or you may have a broker who has a local company but also lists stuff for a bigger company as well in that area. Okay, so then you start compiling a list of brokers. I would recommend that you use, like I said, a Google Doc, a Word doc, a Google Sheet, whatever you want to do, right? And then you just list the name, phone number, email, name, phone number, email, and you start reaching out to these guys or girls in order to actually establish communication with them. Now, before you start reaching out, there's a couple things that I would have you do. And by the way, everything I'm going over with you, I have 4 handouts that I'm going to give you for download that actually come along with this. This is actually part of that book we're compiling. It's from the draft of the book. One is finding and working with practice brokers. Another is navigating the initial conversation with a practice broker. There's a checklist for that as well, so you can kind of summarize it. And then we have a form you fill out, which is called What Type of Practice Am I Looking For? Which I'll get into how to use all this here in a second. Anyway, before I get into the initial conversation with the broker, a couple things to know about brokers. Not all brokers are created equally. Some are nice, some are responsive, some are fast, some are not. It's just like people and just like patients, right? And so the most important thing for you, because keep in mind, you may end up with a broker that you don't necessarily click with or hit it off with. They may end up with a listing eventually that you really want. So it's important that, you know, obviously you're going to handle your communication with professionalism and be nice and whatever, but don't burn any bridges, okay? Make sure that you keep it professional, on point, etc., as you're talking to each and every one of them, and establish good communication with them, because in certain cases, a lot of deals that come up don't even ever make it to market. So if you've got a really good line established with the broker, there may be an opportunity that pops up before they've even listed it, and you'll be their first phone call if you can establish good communication with them and establish yourself as a legitimate buyer. So that's just something to keep in mind as you talk to all of them. The second thing to keep in mind, and this is one of the more important things to understand with a broker, is they're not representing you. Okay? If you're buying a house and you have a real estate agent, that agent is representing you. They have agency, meaning they are legally obligated to represent your best interests. You know, if I have a real estate agent, they're supposed to be looking out for me. This is not the case with dental brokers. They don't have agency with you as a buyer. In some cases, they don't even have agency with the seller. Okay, it's kind of a funny thing if you've never done this or been through this before. In many cases, their primary loyalty or interest lies with the firm that they work for. So sometimes you may find that you end up in some games. There may be a practice that you're looking for, or looking at rather, and you're thinking about it. You're not quite sure if you want to buy it or not yet, and the broker tells you, oh, you know, 4 other people are looking at it, or, you know, the value of the practice is really $420, and the broker's trying to push you to pay $460, and it has nothing to do with what the buyer said. It's just the broker trying to push for a better deal, okay? So just keep that in mind, okay, that some of the things you may hear are not always going to be entirely accurate, and it's important to keep a level head and verify information that you give or that you get rather, and negotiate wisely, okay? So those are the 2 things to know at the basics. So what do we do if we've established our big old list of practice brokers? We want to now reach out to these folks and start talking to them. What's the first thing that we have to do? Well, if you want to establish yourself legitimately, you want to have clarity when you start contacting these folks. In order to have clarity, you have to decide what type of practice you want to buy. So let's talk about that for a minute. So as I mentioned, there's going to be over 20,000 practices that we're projecting that are going to be available on the market over the next 3 to 5 years. All right, now some of these are going to be obvious DSO targets, big group practices, big super productive practices, etc. A lot of them are not going to be. What type of practice are you looking for? Now I'm going to give you my opinion. You can do with it what you want. And I'm going to take it as a new practitioner, or not newer rather, but a practitioner opening their first office and a practitioner who's looking at their second practice. If I'm looking at getting my first office, I'm going to want to make sure, I mean, there's a lot of things I'd look at with due diligence and whatnot, but I'm not going to want to take on too much. I'm going to want to start small and find something that I can scale. I'm looking probably in the $300,000 to $600,000 range as far as what I'm going to pay. Okay. And I want at least 4 operatories, and I'm probably not going to want a lot of, low paying insurance plans in there. I might have some that I eventually want to get rid of, but I'm going to start small. I'm going to pick something that's an obvious non-DSO target, because the way this practice is going to be valued then will be far different. Normally DSO practices are valued a different way. When you buy a normal office, the traditional valuation model is 70% of last year's collections. And I know that people say that's changed or whatever. I still see practices going for that or less. So I would want to start small and scale. I would want opportunity to scale, though, so I'm probably not going to buy an office with 3 chairs with no room for a 4th. Because then, I'm buying low and I'm building this thing up and making it go high. And we have clients that come in as associate doctors, do the MGE Power Program. I'll put a link to that on the episode webpage, by the way, along with these forms that I mentioned. And they'll buy a practice for next to nothing, $400,000, and then the place will be doing $1 to $2 million within 2 years. So they made all the money on the buy at that point. All right. So that's my piece of advice for a newer practitioner, or someone rather who's buying their first office. But that really holds for someone buying their second. This is what we advise our clients, because MGE clients know how to scale a practice. They've scaled their original office. All right. So then when they're buying practice number 2, we have them do the same thing. We're not going to go out and spend $1.5 million and compete bidding with a DSO. No, we're going to buy a small office and scale it. I've had clients do the same thing. They buy an office that's doing $300 a year. It does, or $300 a month, $30 a month, $360 a year. And then it's doing $100 a month within 3 to 4 months with the new associate, the new office manager, you see. So that would be the direction I'd be going, because then you're not spending an excessive amount of money right up front. And there's going to be a lot of practices. And the numbers, as far as what you're buying them for, will really vary by area, because obviously economic conditions vary as well as fees vary. If I'm buying a practice in, Mississippi, fees are going to be lower there than they are in Manhattan or Los Angeles. So then that's going to affect the overall revenues and thereby the value of the practice. So these are things you have to keep in mind as you're bidding for these things. So I'm looking for a smaller office. So the first thing we would have you do is there's a form, as I mentioned. It's called "What Type of Dental Practice Am I Looking For?" And you want to fill this thing out and really think about it, a little thought exercise before you start calling brokers. And the questions are pretty simple. I'll read a few of them to you, and then the form is available for download. First one is, when do I want to open or take over this practice? Because that's going to be an important question. If someone's looking to sell in the next 3 months and you're not looking for 6 or 8 months, then you're obviously not a candidate. How much am I willing to spend? How much do I want to pay? Where do I want this practice to be located? Do I want to lease or own the real estate? Do I want this practice to be in a strip mall, condo, professional building, freestanding building, etc.? You get the general idea. These are just some things that we have you walk through. What are the minimum number of active charts? These are some of the questions. It's 14 simple questions, and then the 15th question is sort of open-ended. Any other things that would be important to you about this office? Because when you call the broker and you introduce yourself, I'm Dr. So-and-so, and they may want, especially when they start showing you listings, they're going to want a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. They may want a copy of your CV to make sure you're legit, because this is the agreements they have with the seller to make sure that this doesn't end up plastered around everywhere. It stays within doctors, or amongst doctors, rather. If this is fully filled out, when you call the broker, it's a very easy conversation, because you're just explaining to them, look, here's who I am. This is what I'm looking for. This is when I want to move on it. This is how much I want to spend. This is how I plan on paying for it, etc. You're just knocking all that out right from the get-go. Okay? Makes it very, very easy, especially the time frame and the search criteria. Now, what might happen from that point? You might also, one of the questions on that list is the practice model you're looking for. Let's say you have practice 1, and you're planning on staying in your main office, practice number 1, and you want to buy another practice and have an associate, in it, an associate-driven practice. There may be associate-driven practices for sale in your area, which is a much easier transaction than replacing the owner doctor who was there. You never know. As a matter of fact, I have one client who's acquiring offices, and he's buying offices from other doctors who had multiple locations that couldn't make a go of it. So he's picking up some of these multiple locations or the additional locations they couldn't manage properly for 50 cents on the dollar. It's going very well. So there's all types of things that might be listed. Okay, so you've introduced yourself. You've given them your basic criteria. Here's what I want, and thing along those lines. The next question you're going to want to ask them is, do they have anything that fits your model? If they have anything that might fit the bill. And you want to have a little bit of a wide range on the productivity is the only thing I would mention. Don't get hard about it. 3 to 500,000. You might go 3 to 6, even though you only want a place that's doing up to 5, because you might have a place doing 525 or 550, as well as all the specifics that you give them. So before they send you stuff, they're going to want your CV. They're going to want the NDA, right? And the most important thing, and this is something Sabri had mentioned, because she and I are the ones putting this book together, is, when you start talking, we've seen this happen to clients, when they're talking to 20 different brokers and they're getting all these listings from all these different places, you're going to want some means of keeping your stuff organized. Like I said, a Google sheet, an Excel spreadsheet. You might just have a notepad, which, you have dates and practices on it, or you might have certain notes and you put them in a binder. Whatever style fits you the best, but you want to organize this data or you're going to get confused, because broker number 11 sent you this, for a practice on Elm Street, and then you thought it was broker number 6 because you got so confused. So have some means of keeping this stuff organized as you go. So you ask about current listings that they might have. Ask for more specific practice details, and I'm going to be getting into those next week, the package you should expect from a broker and how to simply evaluate it to see if it's something that you want to pursue. You might want to also ask a couple other questions. You might want to clarify the competition as well as the offer process for this practice. How competitive is the market, because that's going to affect the price. Have other buyers already submitted offers on this practice? You might find out 5 other people have submitted an offer and it never went through. Well, that's a bit of a red flag. Why is this practice not selling? Okay. You might want to also find out from this broker, what is their typical offer timeline? When are they expecting an offer by, and how soon would they want it to close? You want to know how the offers are also reviewed. Well, once a week I meet with the seller and I go over all the different offers. And then obviously keep track of those communications, and you would then be expecting the package of details that they're supposed to send you to the practice, or about the practice rather, to evaluate these things. So obviously if they don't, if you're keeping track of this stuff, you'll know and you can follow up with them. Okay? But those are the sort of the simple steps. It's a little bit exhaustive from a work perspective, but this way you make sure that you're fully exposed to all the practices that might be for sale in your area. Because what would be horrible is, let's say you set on one broker and it's the only one you're working with, and they have this practice and it doesn't quite check all your boxes, but it doesn't seem like anything else is available. There could literally be a place available down the street because there is no centralized listing place for all these practices. So the only solution for that, literally, is to make a list of every broker that services your area, contact all of them, establish communication with them. You might want to even have your CV ready to go to email when needed to sign their NDA, just so that you can get any listings, assuming you've made that criteria, what type of practice I'm looking for, to get any listings that actually fit the bill for you, so that you can make sure you're actually getting something that might actually work. All right, so shorter episode this week, but I wanted to throw this out here. I found it fascinating. I know it's a bit niche, but it's something that we get asked about a lot, and these opportunities are there. If you're a private practicing dentist and you want to open up other offices, I say more power to you rather than having corporate do it. I think this is the way to go. And as I mentioned, we will have books on this coming out later following our seminar, so there'll be more comprehensive guides. But those forms that I did mention in here, those 4 forms, the what am I looking for, the checklist of the conversation with the broker, and the 2 articles on finding and discussing things with brokers are available for download on the episode webpage, as well as more information on the MGE Power Program. All right, well, as I said, shorter episode. I hope this helped. Don't forget, we have those downloads on the episode webpage, as well as more information on the MGE Power Program. If you're looking for a practice, or you might be at some point in the future, you have this as a reference point. As I mentioned, we will be having books on this coming out later. We'll keep you aware of those. Trust me, I will. We'll talk about them in my shameless plugs as we do the podcast. Otherwise, folks, if you have any questions, you can always email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com, and find us online at mgeonline.com, or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you the next episode.